Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Vermont's annual Zeltzerman Lecture. This event has long been a space for our community to come together and think deeply about the ideas that shape our world. And tonight's theme, higher education, could not be more timely. We are honored to have Dr. Brian Rosenberg, a leading voice in national conversations about the future of colleges and universities, join us this evening on the campus of the University of Vermont. The campus of the University of Vermont sits on a place of gathering and exchange, shaped by water and stewarded by ongoing generations of Indigenous peoples, in particular, the Western Abenaki. Acknowledging the relations between water, land, and people is in harmony with the mission of the university. Acknowledging the serious and significant impacts of our histories on Indigenous peoples and their homelands is part of the university's ongoing work of teaching, research, and engagement, and an essential reminder of our past and our interconnected futures of the many of us gathered on this land. UVM respects the Indigenous knowledge interwoven in this place and commits to uplifting the Indigenous peoples and cultures present on this land and within our community. Dr. Brian Rosenberg is currently a visiting professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he brings both scholarly rigor and decades of practical leadership experience to questions of educational purpose and reform. From 2003 to 2020, he served as the 16th president of Macalester College, guiding that institution through a period of significant change with both courage and clarity. Before his presidency, he held leadership roles as the dean of the faculty of Lawrence University and as professor and chair of the English department at Allegheny College. Dr. Rosenberg earned his BA from Cornell University and his PhD in English from Columbia University, and he has published widely on Victorian literature as well as the challenges and possibilities of higher education today. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Chronicle of Higher Education, where his essays have become required reading for those of us who care about the future of the academy. He also serves as the senior advisor and director of the African Leadership University and as a chair of the board of the Teagle Foundation, further extending his impact on higher education across the globe. Dr. Rosenberg is the author of the 2023 book, Whatever It Is, I'm Against It, Resistance to Change in Higher Education, described by reviewers as, quote, frank, provocative, and refreshingly honest, end quote. In this work, he draws on his years of experience to illuminate why change comes slowly to our institutions and how we might begin to move forward with greater imagination and courage. As we reflect this evening on what higher education is and what it might become, there could be no better guide than Brian Rosenberg, whose career embodies both a deep love of learning and a fearless willingness to question the status quo. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Brian Rosenberg.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Ian. That was a very, very kind introduction. It's great to be back at UVM. I was telling some people the last time I was here was when my best friend from kindergarten went here, and I came to visit him. So I haven't been back for a while. It's also an honor to be delivering the Zeltzerman Lecture. There's only one problem. I don't lecture. I try to talk to people, and then I try to engage them in conversation. So I'll talk for a while, and then I hope we can engage in some conversation. So you might have noticed that we are at the moment a somewhat divided country. There is a lot right now in this country that people don't agree on. And they often don't agree in pretty intense ways. But there is, for better or worse, one thing that many people do seem to agree upon, and that is that they don't like us. And by us, I mean higher education. There was very recently a study done by the Pew Foundation, and of the survey respondents, 70% said that higher education in the United States was going in the wrong direction. And yes, there's politics involved, but lest you think this is a purely partisan response, 77% of Republicans felt that way. 65% of Democrats felt that way. So there is a partisan slant, but this is not exclusively a belief among people of a particular political position. Now, there is reason to take these kinds of surveys with some grains of salt. You see different responses in different surveys. A lot of the response has to do with the way the question is asked. But I do think it is fair to say that right now, the reputation, the credibility, the stature of higher education in the United States is lower than it has been at any point in my now very long career. I entered the higher education bubble at 18 years old when I started at Cornell, and I've never left it. As you heard, I've been a professor, I've been a dean, I've been a college president. I'm now back to being whatever they call me at Harvard, and I'm on boards, and so this has been my world, and I love it. And I am both puzzled and bothered by the fact that it is not held in the regard in which I would like it to be held. So why is this the case? One of the things we cannot do in higher education is ignore the way people feel about us. And something else we can't do is just refuse to acknowledge that some of the blame lies with us. Not all of it. There are some ways in which we are being, I think, unfairly caricatured and described. But there are other ways in which we, in fact, deserve and have invited some of the criticism that is being tossed in our direction. And one of the things I've been saying for some time, and it's unfortunately proven to be even truer than I imagined, is that the problem when people don't like you is that it results in public policy decisions that don't favor you. And we are seeing that right now. Higher education is under attack, and there aren't very many people outside higher education who have come to our defense. And that is a reflection of the way that we are generally perceived. So why do people look at us this way? Part of it, of course, is a broad loss of faith in this country, and I would argue across much of the developed world, in institutions. People in generally feel as if institutions have failed them. And if you look at things like the growing income inequality since about 1980 in the United States and the upward concentration of wealth, it's easy to understand why many people feel as if institutions have failed them. So higher education is not alone. But there are some particular things about higher education, I think, that people have been frustrated with. One of them, the one that you probably hear the most about, is the claim that we are a kind of political echo chamber. That there are only a particular set of accepted points of view, and if those are not your points of view, you feel silenced and excluded. I think that is overstated, but not entirely wrong. Again, as someone who has watched higher education evolve over decades now, it is probably true that we have not been as open to ideas that challenge our own internal orthodoxies as we might be. We need to do better. Because you learn the most by encountering people whose views are not like your own. And you learn the least when you simply surround yourself with an echo chamber, which is one of the many reasons why I dislike social media. But we need to be very careful about that in higher education, and people have criticized us for it, and it is something that we need to pay attention to. We need to make sure that we are open, not to every point of view. We don't expect to teach that the earth is flat. We don't expect every biology department to teach creationism. But we expect difficult questions to be approached from a variety of perspectives. even those that are not broadly popular on a college campus. So people feel that we haven't done a very good job of that. People have noticed that higher education, and this is the subject of the book I wrote, to which Ian referred, people have noticed that higher education has not exactly embraced change. One could make the argument, in fact, I have made the argument, that the university as it exists today is not, in fact, dramatically different from the universities founded in medieval Europe a millennium ago. That as universities were founded as places, physical places with buildings and with libraries to which students came to have their heads filled with knowledge by smart, highly trained people. And that is pretty much still the modern university. There were lecture halls in medieval Europe. There are lecture halls today. There were libraries then. There are libraries today, even though there's more information on my phone than there would have been in the Harvard Library 20 or 30 years ago. So the fundamental structure of the American university has really not changed very much. And think about other industries. When the lecture was created, surgery was being performed by barbers. And think about how medicine has evolved. And think about the fact that someone who was in a university a century ago and walked into a classroom today might be kind of confused and dazzled by the technology, but the fundamental way in which education works has not changed. Yes, when I started as a teacher, I was proud of the fact that I had an IBM Selectric typewriter. I thought that was like the coolest technology. There was no email. I did not have a computer. I used those mimeograph machines. Remember those things that printed out purple things? You don't remember them because you've never seen them. You could, by the way, get high on the fumes from those things. I used overhead projectors. We didn't have slides and PowerPoint. But moving from an overhead projector to a PowerPoint is not a dramatic change. That's simply a different form of technology delivering the same kind of information in the same way. So people wonder why higher education doesn't change the way other industries do. When the US News rankings came out in 1984, I want to say, the same universities were at the top as are at the top today. And that is true of no other industry. Things in higher education don't change, and people wonder why. So it's another reason that they're frustrated with us. People feel as if we are too disconnected from the world beyond our campuses, and they are right. Think about, and I haven't had enough time to walk around the UVM campus to know if this feels true in Burlington. But in a lot of college towns, and even in a lot of cities, the university seems a world apart from the world around it. If you go to Harvard and you go to Harvard Yard, it's surrounded by a big wall. And that is both physical and metaphorical. Have you ever wondered why so many colleges were founded in the middle of nowhere? Well, one of the reasons was the thought was that in order to study the men, and they were exclusively white, mostly Protestant men at that time, the thinking was they had to be separated from all of the temptations of the world in order to be students and scholars. Didn't work very well, but that was the theory. And so from the beginning, colleges and universities were set apart. And what has happened now is that that separation has become a moat. It's become a source of great tension. In many ways, I think right now, politically, the greatest divide in our country is between people who, in fact, have had a higher education and people who have not. And so we have not done a very good job as an industry of connecting to the communities around us. And the communities around us have noticed that and are beginning to be increasingly unhappy about the fact that we are so disconnected from them. It pains me to say this, but by many measures, we're not very good at what we do. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean that the faculty members don't go in and do a great job of teaching, and researchers don't produce extraordinary results. What I mean is, if you look at the overall picture of American higher education, you see far too much failure. The 6-year graduation rate in the United States for a bachelor's degree is 60%. In other words, 40% of the students who start never complete. In most industries, if your success rate were 60%, you would say, what are we doing wrong? Unless you were in baseball, in which case a 600 batting average would be amazing. But think about that for a minute. There are 44 million people in the United States who started college and didn't finish. 44 million. And those are the people, by the way, who have the most profound debt crisis. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is to borrow money for a college degree and not get it. Because all of the economic benefits of a bachelor's degree accrue if you complete. So if you're in an industry where 40% of the people who start don't finish, you should look at yourself and say something's not right. And if you look at underrepresented populations, the numbers are worse. The percentage of African American men who complete a college degree, who start and complete a college degree in 6 years, is 40%. We should look at that as an industry and feel ashamed of ourselves. Something is not right if so many students are not completing. And again, a lot of those people, the people who started and didn't finish, are the ones who feel most negatively about the work that we do. The other thing that we aren't very good at, and again, I don't have fun saying this, but we just have to acknowledge the truth of it. We're not as good at teaching as we think. We still rely much too heavily on methods that are shown to be ineffective. For instance, the lecture. Here I am giving you the Zeltzerman Lecture, telling you that lectures don't work very well. But there are reams of evidence now that show that lectures are not a particularly effective way of teaching. A colleague of mine at Harvard, Eric Mazur, who's a renowned physicist, but has spent most of his career studying science education, has said that lectures give teachers the illusion of teaching and students the illusion of learning. And what research has shown is that people don't retain very well what they hear simply sitting in a classroom. And I can testify to that fact from my own life. Because I was too afraid to tell my mother I didn't want to be a doctor, took the entire pre-medical curriculum, even though I was an English major. And within a year after taking a 700-person lecture in chemistry, didn't remember a word of it, didn't remember anything. The things that we remember and know how to do are based upon the things that we actually do. People learn much more from doing than from listening. In other words, experiential learning is a more effective way of teaching than lecturing. And yet it has been agonizingly difficult for higher education to broadly adopt experiential learning. And so even our fundamental work, the work of teaching, is not as effective as we would like it to be, and we have been unable to change that. And I think it has frustrated people. But the thing that people are unhappiest about is how darn expensive we are. In that same Pew survey, the number one source of dissatisfaction in higher education was not politics, it was not wokeness, it was cost. 79% of the respondents said the worst problem in American higher education is the failure to keep tuition affordable. So almost 80% of the people in this broad survey basically said to us, you are too expensive. And we are. I looked it up, and I think the out-of-state cost of a year at UVM is around $60,000, which sounds like a lot, except about 2 months ago I spoke at Boston University. The annual cost of attendance at Boston University is $85,000. And just staying in New England, the annual cost of attendance at Smith College has broken the $100,000 a year barrier. If you do the math, Macalester, my former institution, which I love, now is $80-something thousand a year for its comprehensive fee. If you do the math, and I did because I have a calculator on my phone, and you add a 4% annual tuition increase for 10 years, the cost of attending Macalester College in 10 years will be $125,000 a year. In other words, for a 4-year education, it would cost a family $500,000. Now, yes, many people, and at some institutions, most people, and at some institutions, nobody pays the full price. I understand that. But first of all, people do look at that sticker price. That's what makes the headlines, and it gets them angry and it turns them away. And second of all, even people who can afford it are increasingly saying, that's crazy, I don't want to pay that much. In order to have a customer, you have to have both the ability for that customer to pay and the desire to pay. And increasingly, even the most affluent people are looking at the price tag and saying, that's too much. And colleges are having to discount in order to attract them. Another sign that an industry is in crisis is how much you have to put things on sale. If you get in your inbox ad after ad from some company there are some companies where things are always on sale, I've noticed. And if you walked into imagine walking into a store and there was a sign, everything on sale 60% off. You would probably assume it was a closeout sale. Well, the average discount rate in American private higher education right now is almost 60%. That is, higher education in the United States, private higher education, private institutions, so not public institutions like UVM, private institutions are marking down their prices by 60% in order to try to fill their seats. Every year it goes up, and it doesn't go up by a fraction. It's been going up by 2 or 3 percentage points a year. That is the definition of unsustainable. Because sooner or later you get to a discount rate of 100% and you give it away for free. And that doesn't work. I'm not an economist, but that doesn't work. So one sign that your product or service is too expensive is if people are unwilling or unable to pay for it. And that is the situation right now of American higher education. So people are unhappy with us for many reasons, but the number one reason is that we have not found a way to bend the cost curve the way most industries or many industries have. And I can I can talk, or I can certainly take questions about why that's the case. So that's all the bad news. What can we do about this? And I think there are things we can do. I don't think the situation is irrevocable or hopeless. I try, though it is not my natural state, to be optimistic. And so what can we do to try to improve the public regard for, the public perception of, the public support for higher education? Well, your solution has to begin with the number one problem. And if the number one problem is cost, then your solution has to begin with lowering the cost or bending that cost curve. We simply cannot continue as an industry on the economic trajectory that we are following right now. This is very, very hard to do. And without getting into the economic weeds, I will say that higher education suffers from something that the economists William Baumol and William Bowen went on to become the president of Princeton, and the Mellon Foundation defined in the 1960s as cost disease. It's a lovely, lovely, attractive term. And what it means is that you are increasing your costs but not increasing your productivity. And that's basically what's happened. It happens in certain industries, and higher education is one of them. We have become more expensive our bills have become more expensive, but we've become no more efficient. When I started at Macalester in 2003, the student-faculty ratio was 10 to 1. In 2025 at Macalester, the student-faculty ratio is 10 to 1. So people are working hard, but nobody is teaching more students, and yet the cost of everything has gone up. And so if you increase costs and you don't increase productivity, then your costs are going to you need to pass along to your customers, are just going to keep going up and up and up. And that's what's happened in higher education. We have not figured out ways. It's almost a dirty word in higher education to use the word efficiency. And I kind of get it. I was a professor. I understand. Even the fact that I've used the word customer would have probably provoked a vote of no confidence at a faculty meeting. Even though the reality is that students are customers. Higher education for many families is the most expensive thing that they will buy in their lives, with the possible exception of their home. And it is arrogant of us not to take seriously the fact that they are customers. And we owe something to them for that investment. So we need to figure out a way to bend that cost curve. We need to figure out a way, whether it's by using technology more effectively. Higher education may be the only industry, with the exception of dentistry, where technology has actually made things more expensive. It hasn't made things cheaper. So we need to think about whether technology can do it. And we need, and this is something that we are terrible at, we need to decide what we're not going to do. Probably the most frustrating problem I encountered in higher education in my career is the inability for colleges and universities to say no. To say we're not going to do that anymore. Because you know what happens when you try to say that. Alumni get mad, students get mad, faculty get mad, and more often than not, the people who run these institutions say, you know what, it's not worth it. And only when it reaches a crisis point, and we're in one of those points right now, do institutions finally say we're going to have to cut something. And usually when you're in a crisis, you don't make the best decisions. Far too many institutions try to be all things to all people. There's an institution, I won't name it, it's a liberal arts college in Illinois that's been around for 150 years. It has 700 students. On its website, it says, no matter what your interest, we have a program for you. 700 students. They're trying to be a miniature version of an R1 university. You can't do that. So we need to make harder decisions about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do if we're going to have any hope of trying to lower the cost of higher education. We have to stop looking at liberal education and vocational education as being intentioned. For many of us who spent our career, like me, at a liberal arts college, if you even use the word vocational, you are criticized. That's wrong. First of all, I would argue that liberal arts has always been about preparing students for vocation. But there is nothing to say that we can't both educate students to be engaged citizens in a democracy and educate students to be simply wiser and more interesting people, and educate students to get jobs. And we have a responsibility as colleges and universities to help them get jobs. We're getting better at it. When I started at Macalester, we had a tiny little career development office for students, and if they happened to wander in, which they usually did in the second semester of their senior year, maybe they got some useful advice. That's not good enough now. Colleges, no matter whether they're a liberal arts college or a public university or a private university, have a responsibility to try to connect students to the world of work. And if they do a better job of that, they will be met with more approval from the public. One of the things you hear again and again and again from families is, we've spent all this money on a degree and my kid can't get a job. A lot of that is anecdotal, and the reality is that a bachelor's degree is still the best economic investment that you can make. But we cannot pretend that one of the things that we have a responsibility to do is not prepare students for the world of work, which means, and it gets back to this issue of separating ourselves from the communities around us. Every college in the country should be doing what the president of Allegheny College, where, as Ian said, I started my career, did. Allegheny College is located in Meadville, Pennsylvania, classic Rust Belt, northwestern Pennsylvania town. And it's struggling. Its enrollment, when I was at Allegheny College, it had 2,100 students. It's down to about 1,600. And I think its president realized that if we don't do something, we're not going to be around in another 10 or 20 years. And so he went out in this Rust Belt town and he spoke to every major employer. And he said, what do you need from us? And their initial response was, nothing that you do. You're a liberal arts college, you're that pretty campus on a hill surrounded by this Rust Belt town. And so nothing that you do. He said, tell me what you need. And they said, and these are people like tool and die manufacturers. And they said things like, well, you know, we need better design thinking among our employees. We need them to be able to communicate better. We need them to be able to work in teams more effectively. And he said, okay, we can do that. And then he had his department chairs meet with the employers. And fear is a great motivator, and fear of closure is a particularly good motivator. And all of a sudden, the art department said, you know what, we could teach design thinking. And the English department said, we could teach technical writing. And now they've set up an entire campus. It's not their main campus. It's rented space off campus that exclusively focuses on providing this kind of mid-career training for people in the region. And too often in higher education, we look at that as lowering ourselves. It's not lowering yourself. If anything, it's elevating yourself to meeting an important social need. So we need to reach out to those communities more, and we need to start redefining who our audience is. The audience for traditional American higher education is the 18 to 24-year-old high school graduate, right? That's our market. Well, you know what's happening to that market? It's shrinking. And it hasn't even gotten as bad as it's going to get. We are about to go over what I'm sure many of you have heard of as the demographic cliff. In the next 10 years or so, the number of high school graduates in the United States is going to decline by 15%. So take whatever enrollment challenges exist now and take away 15% of that market. And it's particularly bad in New England, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest. In other words, where most of the colleges are. And so if you were in any other business and you looked at your market and you saw it was going like this, and then you saw what we call the adult or the continuing ed market and saw it was like this, you would say we need to go after that market. And that's what higher education needs to do. It needs to stop thinking of itself as something that you do on the way to somewhere, and it needs to start thinking of itself as something that you do throughout your life. And we should be good at that. And it is not lowering ourselves to think that we're not just going to teach in a bachelor's degree program but we're going to teach in a program that provides a whole variety of different kinds of people with lifelong learning. That would help the bottom line, it would help the public perception, and it would help our society. And so higher education needs to think about that. And finally, and this is the last point I'll make before I open it up to conversation or discussions, is how do we start to change more effectively? Well, we need to start doing what a lot of industries do, and that is we need to pilot and test new ideas. Faculty meetings are where good ideas go to die. And I've made this mistake many times myself as a president and as a dean, starting that, well, I'll start at the top and I'll try to convince everybody. And almost every time I failed. Where I had the most success in changing things is where I worked from the bottom up. That is, I took a small group of people and gave them a problem to work and said, come up with some solutions. You know, lock yourselves in a room with some whiteboards and come up with some ideas. And then I'll give you the support to pilot those and to test them out. And some of them will fail, but some of them might work. And if they work, then they can grow. And if you demonstrate success, you can convince other people. So the biggest mistake I think a lot of us in higher education make is to try to change everything at once and not do enough piloting and testing of good new ideas. If you don't separate those new ideas and give them some room to grow, the mothership will always eat the babies, always. Business as usual will always eat innovation if you don't protect innovation. And so we need to do more of that in higher education. We need to let lots of people do business as usual, and then we need to give the people who want to innovate on every campus they exist some space and some support to do that. And if we do that, we're not going to change everything all at once. It's just not going to happen. It's too hard with institutions that have been around for as long as these universities and colleges have been around. But we can change some things in some ways that matter to people. So in conclusion, we're not in great shape. There are reasons why we're not in great shape. But there are also things that we could do to both improve the way that we are perceived and, more important, actually improve the quality of the work that we do. So with that, I'm going to stop talking at you. And I would welcome, we have time for whatever questions you'd like to ask and whatever conversation you'd like to engage in. Any points that I made that you'd like me to elaborate on, any that you disagree with, any that you agree with. This is always the part of these gatherings that I most enjoy. So, what do you want to talk about? So we're going to we'll use a mic so that everybody can hear.
What are your thoughts about perceiving colleges and universities as a brand? And by which I mean Harvard as a brand which attracts mega millionaires, international students whose parents are mega millionaires or billionaires, and who have their students might spend up, according to Wall Street Journal, as much as $1 million to prepare their kids for school in terms of writing the essay, preparing for the interview, SAT preparation, and so forth. And my second concept of branding is Division A1 major university branding, where we're talking about football stadiums with luxury boxes and seating capacity of 50,000, 100,000, parents and students expecting residence halls that are the equivalent of a 3-star hotel, dining rooms that measure up to a Michelin 2-star.
That's not Sodexo, I
selection.
don't think.
I beg your pardon?
I don't think that's Sodexo.
Right. Physical facilities that are equivalent to Olympic training camp facilities, and so forth. You get the idea. Now, in terms of the non-brand, we'll say Allegheny or Macalester. Do you agree with me on that? They are non-brand institutions of higher education.
Oh, I'm not going to agree with you about the Macalester brand.
Okay, and okay, but small liberal arts colleges of that genre.
It's not Harvard's brand.
My
I will agree
question
with you on
is
that.
for the, not for the MIT type student or Caltech or what have you. Can a typical student at Macalester get the same type quality of education, undergraduate student, as one can in Harvard or any of the Ivies?
All right, so there's a lot there. Let me start by answering your last question. No, they won't get the same type. They'll get a better type. I will admit that I have consumed the liberal arts college Kool-Aid. But having spent my own education at Cornell and Columbia, and now having spent the last 5 years at Harvard, I believe deeply that the undergraduate education provided at a place like Harvard is inferior to that provided at many institutions. The reason being that it is not a priority. If you were to list the top 10 priorities of Harvard University, undergraduate education might not make the list. Harvard University makes as much money from its non-degree professional training programs as it does from all its degree programs combined. Harvard University's biggest source of revenue and biggest expenditure is its medical center. Harvard University could be described as a medical system with a university attached. Harvard offers almost 40 intercollegiate sports, the highest number in the country. Why, you ask, does it offer so many sports? Because they disproportionately attract wealthy white students.
And international students, affluent international students.
Some of them do. So the brand, look, branding in higher education is disproportionately important. It is, by the way, another reason people don't like us, is because they base their impression of higher education on the elites. And the reason they do that is that that's what gets media attention. Harvard University gets mentioned more often in a year in the New York Times and the Washington Post than all of the community colleges in the United States combined. Harvard University educates 25,000 students. Community colleges educate 8 million. But when people think about higher, it is so common for people to say, I like my local college, but I don't like higher education. And what they really mean is, I don't like those elite institutions. The reason that branding matters so much, again, I could go into the weeds on this, but higher education is an example of what economists, it's amazing how much I know about economics for a guy who was an English professor. This is a testament to a liberal arts education. I'm a lifelong learner. Higher education is an example of what is called a credence good. And what is a credence good is something whose value you don't even know when you buy it. When you go into a restaurant and you have a meal, or you buy a bottle of wine and you drink it, you can decide, I like this, I don't like it, I'll go to that restaurant again, or I won't. You can test it. It's not the way higher education works. You don't get to pick, some students transfer, but when you pick a college or university, what do you rely on? You rely on the opinions of experts and on branding and on reputation, because you have nothing else to go on. That is why the US News rankings are so influential. US News ranks everything. There is no magazine anymore. US News is not a magazine. It is a rankings organization. But the only rankings that really have profound meaning are the ones in education. And that is because of that's the nature of education. It's a credence good. So reputation means too much, and they're very sticky. Harvard's brand is arguably the strongest brand in the world, period. And not the strongest education brand, the strongest brand. Even with all of the stuff that's happened at Harvard over the last 2 years, they're still admitting 4% of their students, of their applicants. It has had no effect on the desire of people to go to Harvard University because the brand is bulletproof. There are a lot of reasons for that. So I don't like the branding, but it matters. I'm not going to get into Division I athletics. It's an obscenity. I read today that collectively, right now, Division I universities are paying several $100 million for football coaches who they fired. LSU is about to pay the football coach it fired something like $50 million. And I'm guessing that the adjunct faculty in the English department in LSU are not paid very well. And Penn State is paying the football coach they fired, I don't know, $55, $60 million at the same time as they're making budget cuts left and right. So we are the only country in the world that treats athletics as part of colleges and universities. On the Division III level, it's not perfect, but it's way better. There are no scholarships. There are no athletic scholarships. It still has some issues, which I'm aware of. But on the Division I level, and particularly in football and basketball, it has become the tail that wags the dog, and it's wrong. You know, I don't know how we fix that one because there's so many billions involved.
Do you feel that admitting students to the colleges like D1 universities for athletics is a good thing or a bad thing?
You know, again, this is one where if I could go back and build a university from scratch, I wouldn't do it. But at this point, it's impossible to change. I wish we didn't have to do it. I wish athletics were treated like club sports, like they are in most institutions. They do, at this point, provide a way for many colleges to survive. You know, without football, there are many institutions that would have almost no male students. And you know, athletics are an important part of the lives of many young people, and I support that. The question is, does it have to be something that is a factor in college admissions that leads? I mean, there is in higher education affirmative action for men. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's true, and a lot of that is driven by athletics. Do I think it's a good thing? You know, if I had to start a place from scratch, I wouldn't do it. But you know, it's not going away. So I would rather judge students on other criteria rather than their ability to throw a football or shoot a basketball or swing a tennis racket.
So I kind of have a two-parter question. First, with budget cuts, where is that money coming from to lower costs for students? Is that going to come from like someone higher up's pockets, or isn't it going to come from resources for students? And then with being able to like be more innovative in testing and piloting, is going to cost money, and is that going to be able to happen at the same time, or is there going to be an order for universities to do that?
So the money that's when students get financial aid, excuse me, it's not actually an expense, it's a discount. So if you get a $10,000 scholarship from a college or university, they're not giving you $10,000, they're just charging you $10,000 less. So the money doesn't necessarily have to come from anywhere. The way you get the money is by figuring out how to spend less somewhere else. Now, obviously, some of it can come from donors. And so there are people who give gifts, establish scholarships, that go into endowments that support financial aid. But the only way that on a major level the cost to students is going to be lowered, I'm using cost in the wrong way. The price to students, the only way that the price that students pay will be lowered is if the cost of providing the service is lowered. So colleges have to figure out a way to spend less in order to charge students less. That's going to be the major way to do it. And yes, piloting and testing typically will cost something. In my experience, it doesn't have to cost a lot. So I'll give you an example. When I first got to Macalester, because Macalester is located in the middle of the Twin Cities, it's a 3 million person metropolitan area. Very few liberal arts colleges are in locations like that. And so one of my bright ideas as a new president was, why don't we have a community engagement requirement? You know, we have a writing requirement, we have a math requirement. Why don't we really put a stake in the ground and have a community engagement requirement? Well, the faculty threw that one back in my face, voted it down at a faculty meeting. We're not doing that. I said, all right, I'm going to create presidential discretionary grants. Any faculty member who wants to either create a civic engagement course or revise an existing course to include a civic engagement component, I'll give you a presidential discretionary grant. I think the maximum, they range from $1,000 to $2,000 a grant. They weren't a lot of money. I didn't choose. I gave it to our Center for Scholarship and Teaching and said, that's where your applications go. Those guys will choose. We went from 12 to 75 civic engagement courses in 2 or 3 years. It was, yes, the money mattered. What mattered more to the people was the fact that the institution cared. These are the people who wanted to do it, and the fact that the president was saying, I support you in this, I think it's a good idea. If you talk to a lot of faculty, you know, very few people who go into teaching and go into it because they want you to get rich. And yes, money matters, but institutional support in intangible ways often matters as much. And so empowering people without having to go through a vote at a faculty meeting to pursue their best ideas will cost some money, but often not as much as you think. So, you know, most presidents have some sort of a presidential discretionary fund or something that they can use to make these investments. And if you have to, again, you have to decide not to do something else, as hard as it is. One of the things I was completely unsuccessful at as a college president, when I started at Macalester in 2003, so I started in 2003. By the time I left, we had added majors in Chinese, in Arabic, in data science. We had added concentrations in community and global health, food, agriculture, and society. We had eliminated nothing. We eliminated nothing. And that is an unsustainable path. What happens to a lot of the new programs then is that they're underfunded, and you're beginning to spread all your funds more thinly, and you're doing more things less well. So you got to figure out ways to stop doing things.
Perfect lead in. Do you know of examples of places where presidents or other organizations have decided to stop? Maybe it didn't happen at Macalester, but the watering down is a big concern, I think, and I'm just curious if you've seen where that's been done well. We're going to set aside this thing, and you know, for example, here shortly after arriving, I remember the baseball team was effectively canceled, and there was, you know, a lot of pushback. But there's no baseball team today. There's never been a football team here, so we have set some things aside and chosen not to do them. Are there examples you have of where that sort of change was successful?
So do you have my son went to Vassar. Do you have Vassar, they have a T-shirt that said Vassar football undefeated since 1870.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you have the same thing. Yeah, there are examples. They tend to be driven by constraint. Constraint drives innovation. Abundance does not drive innovation. And so, there's a school that I've worked with that's outside Buffalo, Deauville University it's called, and it started out as a Catholic women's liberal arts college, and it was failing badly. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to get rid of everything except we're going to lean into the health sciences. And we're going to become a health science college. We're not going to try to be a comprehensive liberal arts college, so they started online health science programs in addition to in-person. They dramatically grew programs in areas like nursing and physical therapy. They're actually now trying to get accredited an osteopathic medical school. So they said, this is what we're going to do. All those other things we're not going to do. So, I mean, what you typically see in higher education is the same pattern. Budget crisis and two forms of cuts. Either completely strategic across the board, completely unstrategic across the board cuts, or cuts by attrition. We'll just wait for people to retire, or we'll offer an early retirement buyout. And what typically happens is the people who take it are not the people you want to take it. And so there's nothing strategic about that. So you cut your budget, but you don't really make a strategic decision. The other thing you see is institutions facing budget crises. So, there was a lot of noise around the University of West Virginia when Gordon Gee, who is a character and not necessarily one of the college presidents I would emulate, but they slashed dramatically a lot of the humanities, including foreign languages. And they did it because they don't have any money. And West Virginia doesn't have any people. And they have fewer people. Now, one of the reasons they had to do it is because he spent money on all the wrong things. They built all these buildings. They developed a plan for growing the enrollment, which made no sense given the demographics of West Virginia. So now they had to cut. So they cut. I mean, that's the typical pattern. You just sort of either cut randomly or cut in a form of emergency. The Deauville example, where you do it strategically and consciously by saying we're going to do X and we're not going to do Y, is much more rare. It runs into the same roadblocks again and again. And it's not just faculty. In some ways, trustees and alumni can be worse. When I got to Macalester, there was an intercollegiate Nordic skiing team. And it was my first year, and there were 9 students, and it cost a fortune because you had to travel all over the place. There aren't that many intercollegiate Nordic skiing teams. And so the athletic director came to me and said, we want to change this to a club sport, not an intercollegiate sport. I said, do it. I got 500 angry emails, and 480 of them were for people who had nothing to do with Macalester, telling me that I was ruining Nordic skiing in America. That's the response you get when you try to cut anything. My other son went to Swarthmore, where the president, Al Bloom, eliminated football. Al Bloom was president at Swarthmore for 19 years. He did all these great things. At the end of 19 years, there was still a substantial portion of the alumni community that hated him because he got rid of football. So it's hard. And it's especially hard at a place like Swarthmore, which has tons of money. So they didn't have to do it. It just was a decision that they made. We weren't going to do this anymore. So there aren't as many examples as I'd like to see. I will say that there are a lot of institutions outside the US where I think most of the innovation is happening. including the one that Ian referred to that I'm working with in Africa. And when they create, when you can start from scratch, you can consciously make the decision, we're going to just do these things. We're not going to try to do everything. So very few of these new institutions are trying to emulate sort of the American liberal arts model. They're saying we're going to focus on this area. We're going to have fewer areas that we teach, fewer areas that students can major in, and it's one of the ways that they have to control their costs because they don't have the luxury of spending what most American institutions can spend.
On that note about stuff in Europe and the rest of the world,
I'm trying to figure out who. Oh, there you are.
sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. So a lot of these problems, like the athletics one, but especially the cost. I mean, I don't know much about global education, but I know that people in Europe, for instance, don't have to pay like 20,000 or something. It's usually like 1,000. I think in some countries it's free. So what do you think of that stuff, like in relation to America? I know that's a pretty different model, so it's not, you can't just say, oh, Europe education isn't expensive, so just destroy the tuition price completely. Like,
so it's a great question, and it really gets to the roots of the way American culture is different from other cultures and societies around the world. I teach a class in the ed school at Harvard called Ethical Questions in Higher Education. And we devote a whole class to the question, is higher education a right or a privilege? It's interesting, the International Declaration of Human Rights, even that is fuzzy on it. But what you're touching on is that there are countries in the world that provide much more of a government subsidy to support higher education. Just the way there are countries in the world that provide much more of a subsidy to support pre-K education. There are countries in the world that provide much more of a subsidy to provide parental leave. For whatever reasons, in this country, we have developed a culture of individualism where we don't support those things. We don't support universal pre-K financially. We don't support parental or maternity leave universally. And we don't provide the level of support, government support for higher education that is provided in many countries. Now, for a long time, one could argue that, they're providing support, but they're educating a smaller percentage of their population. But increasingly, that's not the case in some other countries, where higher percentages of their population are, in fact, getting a post-secondary education. It's a matter of what your government decides to spend its money on and how much the citizens of a country are willing to be taxed. If we were taxed at the level of Europe, we could support higher education at the level of Europe. We are unwilling in this country to be taxed at that level. And so if you're unwilling to be taxed, then you're not going to get the services. You can't have both low taxes, which, despite the complaints in this country, compared to other developed countries, we have really low taxes, and also the level of government support that they have in other countries. So it's a social decision that we've made, and it affects K through 12 education. It affects pretty much everything. The Pell Grant, when the Pell Grant was created, it was able to pretty much cover the cost of tuition. I think the Pell Grant now is up to a maximum of 8,000, maybe a little under 8. That doesn't cover much of tuition. So we've decided as a country we're not going to increase the Pell Grant to keep up with the cost of higher education. Or some people have decided that, and the rest of the country has just not paid attention. So yes, it's not that the education systems in those countries are necessarily worse, it's just that they're supported in a different way.
I'm going to take yet another poke at big-time college athletics, and that has to do with this new program called NIL. Name,
Yeah, name, image, likeness.
and what's it like?
Likeness. Name, image, likeness.
And I think it promotes unwholesome values. For example, there are high school All-American athletes who would select a particular college because the boosters, the alumni, say, well, I can get an NIL contract. These are people unproven in intercollegiate. I can get you a contract for NIL, for your name, your image, and your likeness. And then a year later, a booster at a competing university says, I can get you a $2 million. And I'm not making these sums up. I've read about them. I can get you a deal for $2 million. And that particular star athlete will transfer to the other institution, and possibly to a third or fourth before the person completes his undergraduate eligibility. I'm not saying gets his degree, but completes his eligibility. Thank you.
We can agree it's not good.
Yeah, I think some people, I don't know how many people, thought that the increase, of course, in colleges in the recent years and decades might be to a certain extent due to the expansion of the administrative staff. So I'm wondering whether you think that is true, and whether you think that there should be certain kind of ratio between the money spent on administrative staff and money spent on faculty and other things that is really put into education rather than administrative.
So it is undeniably true that administrative staff have grown more rapidly than faculty. It is also true that at many institutions there are too many administrators. But there are a couple of things there are a couple of qualifiers I would add. And you have to understand who is classified as administrative staff. When I started in higher education, I think there were 2 people who worked in IT. And when I left Macalester, I think our IT was 35 people. So there have been certain areas that either because of the change in the way education is delivered or government regulation have necessarily grown. When I arrived at Macalester, there was no disability services office. There was no Title IX officer. It was just done by the Dean of Students. When I left, there were 3 people in the Title IX office and 4 people in the disability services office. So some of the growth has been due to the changed nature of what universities are expected to do. We doubled the size of our health and wellness staff because parents now expect colleges to be the physical and mental health providers for their students. And that wasn't the case when I started college. And so certain areas have grown because of regulation. Certain areas have grown because needs of students weren't being met. Certain have grown because of public demand. But there's also been a lot of unnecessary growth. And so as we look to reduce costs, one of the areas we need to look at is administrative growth. I was a faculty member for 15 years and a dean and president for 22. I feel like I lived in both worlds. I feel like the demonization on both sides is unhealthy. People need to recognize that everybody on a campus is at the end of the day trying to do the same thing, which is educate students. And so there's definitely administrative waste. There's also some faculty waste. There were departments at Macalester College with 4 tenure-track faculty and 3 majors. So we need to look at it all to figure out ways to be more cost efficient and to keep what families have to pay as reasonable as possible. So I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your coming.